Finally, Jack Nicholson. He turned 89 this week. Nicholson, a three-time Oscar winner, doesn't make many public appearances these days.
And man, he might be the best of all time.
Yeah.
There is a particular kind of silence that only the truly powerful can afford. Not the silence of someone forgotten, pushed aside, or run out of chances, but the silence of a man who looked at everything the world was still offering him and simply decided he had seen enough. That is the silence Jack Nicholson has been living inside for the better part of 15 years. No farewell press conference. No retirement speech. No documentary explaining his reasons. Just a gate on a hill above Los Angeles, and a legend left completely intact. 3 Academy Awards. 12 Oscar nominations. More than any male actor in the history of the Academy. A career spanning 5 decades and 64 films. And then, without warning or explanation, nothing at all. To understand why Jack Nicholson walked away from Hollywood, you first have to understand what Hollywood was built on top of. Because long before he became the most dangerous smile in American cinema, he was a boy in New Jersey living inside a lie so thorough and so carefully maintained that it took nearly 4 decades to crack it open. He was born on April 22, 1937, in Neptune City, New Jersey, and from the very first day of his life, everything about his identity was a constructed fiction. His biological mother, June Nicholson, was only 17 years old when she became pregnant. The father was a man who was already married to someone else. In 1930s America, an unwed teenage mother in a small New Jersey community was not a private matter. It was a scandal capable of destroying a family's reputation entirely. So June's parents made a decision that would quietly govern the next 4 decades of Jack's life. His grandmother, Ethel Mae Nicholson, stepped in and registered herself as the boy's mother. June was repositioned in the family as his much older sister. His Aunt Lorraine, June's sister, was presented to him as another sibling. The fiction was maintained so completely that even extended relatives were told the same story, and not one person broke ranks. Jack grew up inside this constructed reality without any reason to question it. He had a genuinely warm childhood. Ethel Mae was devoted to him. He was mischievous and popular at Manasquan High School, where his classmates voted him class clown in 1954, and he spent so much time getting into trouble that he reportedly served detention every single day for an entire school year. He followed June to Los Angeles at 17, thinking she was simply the only relative he had out on the West Coast. He had no idea he was following his own mother. The truth did not arrive from within the family. It arrived in June of 1974 from a researcher at Time magazine who was preparing a cover story on Nicholson and stumbled across the extraordinary secret buried in the family's records. The researcher called Nicholson on the phone to check the information and delivered, in a single conversation, the news that the woman he had called his mother for 37 years was actually his grandmother, and that the woman he had called his sister was his biological mother. Even more staggering was the claim that his biological father was still alive and living in New Jersey. Biographer Patrick McGilligan later recounted that Nicholson's initial reaction to the call was raw disbelief. He immediately reached out to family members for confirmation. His Aunt Lorraine eventually admitted the truth. By then, both June and Ethel Mae were already gone. June had died of cancer in 1963, Ethel Mae in 1970, taking the secret to their graves without ever giving him the chance to ask a single question directly. Nicholson later told Rolling Stone that he held no deep resentment toward his family over the deception, and that he was, if anything, genuinely impressed by their ability to keep such a complete secret for so long. He described the discovery as dramatic, but said that by 37 he was already psychologically formed enough that it did not fundamentally undo him. But the imprint of that childhood was real, and its effects were visible throughout his adult life. He never married. He kept his romantic life deliberately complicated. He let the world see the performance of himself while keeping the interior carefully guarded. The boy who had been raised inside a fundamental untruth about who he was grew into a man with a particular and permanent relationship to distance, the kind that looks like wildness from the outside but is actually a very controlled form of self-protection. None of that early complexity was visible on the surface when he finally broke through in Hollywood, and his arrival there was itself nearly a non-event. He spent the better part of a decade as a struggling actor with no real traction. His first job in the entertainment industry was as an office assistant in the animation department at MGM Studios, running errands, carrying messages, watching the machinery of show business from the furthest possible remove. He tried acting, trained seriously, and appeared in a string of low-budget films throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s that barely registered with audiences or critics. By the mid-1960s, he had appeared in more than a dozen pictures and still had almost no name recognition. He started writing screenplays out of practical necessity, because nobody was reliably offering him the parts he needed. The role that finally changed everything, George Hansen in Easy Rider in 1969, only became available because another actor dropped out of the production at the last moment. The film became a cultural earthquake, and Nicholson rode the shockwave straight to his first Oscar nomination. What followed was one of the most extraordinary unbroken runs in the history of American film. 5 Easy Pieces in 1970 confirmed he was not a one-picture phenomenon. Chinatown in 1974, directed by Roman Polanski, established him as a generational dramatic talent. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975 won him his first Academy Award for Best Actor and swept all 5 major Oscar categories, a feat that had only been achieved once before in history. The Shining in 1980 gave him one of the most iconic and imitated performances in the history of horror. Terms of Endearment in 1983 won him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Batman in 1989, where he played the Joker, made him one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood history through a profit-sharing arrangement that reportedly earned him somewhere between $60 and $90 million from that single production alone. A Few Good Men in 1992 gave him one of his most quoted moments on screen. As Good as It Gets in 1997 won him his 3rd Academy Award, making him only the 2nd actor in history to win the prize 3 times. For 4 decades, he was not just a movie star. He was a monument, as recognizable for his courtside seats at Los Angeles Lakers games as for any character he had ever played. Running alongside this extraordinary professional life was a romantic history that was just as turbulent and just as defining. His most significant relationship was with actress Angelica Houston, who he met in 1973 when she was 21 and he was 36. They were together for 17 years in an on-again, off-again arrangement that became one of the most storied and complicated partnerships in Hollywood history. Houston later wrote about the relationship in her memoir and spoke about it candidly in interviews, describing a dynamic that was intense and deeply loving but also marked by Nicholson's chronic infidelity, which he tolerated for years while never fully making peace with it. The relationship ended for good in 1990 when Nicholson had to tell Houston that another woman, actress Rebecca Broussard, was going to have his child. Houston's response, as she later recounted, was composed and final. She told him there was only room for one woman in the picture, and that she was going to step out of it. 17 years ended in a single conversation. Broussard went on to have 2 children with Nicholson, his daughter Lorraine, born in 1990, and his son Ray, born in 1992, before that relationship also eventually ran its course. What followed the Broussard years, in terms of Nicholson's romantic life, was a gradual and visible winding down. He dated Laura Flynn Boyle in the early 2000s, and when that ended, he was in his late 60s and, by most accounts, simply tired. The energy that had powered the wildest personal life in Hollywood for 4 decades was finally slowing. In one of his last extended conversations with the press, a 2013 Vanity Fair interview, he said something that landed differently than anything around it. He admitted that he no longer had the drive to be out there in the world the way he once had, that the only films he still cared about were the ones that dealt with real emotion, and that during his final movies he had barely left the hotel room at night. For a man whose off-screen life had been as legendary as his performances, that admission was a window into something fundamental. The engine that had powered everything, the appetite for experience, for risk, for chaotic human contact, had gone quiet. His final film, a romantic comedy called How Do You Know, was released in December 2010. It reunited him with director James L. Brooks, with whom he had made Terms of Endearment and As Good as It Gets, and it starred Reese Witherspoon, Paul Rudd, and Owen Wilson. On paper, it had all the ingredients of at least a competent film. In practice, it was a commercial and critical disaster that lost tens of millions of dollars. Nicholson, without ever saying so publicly, never appeared in another film again. He was approached for other roles. He reportedly passed on parts that eventually went to Robert Duvall and Harrison Ford. He was briefly attached to an American remake of the acclaimed German film Toni Erdmann in 2017, a project that generated genuine excitement in industry circles before collapsing entirely. Director Mike Flanagan revealed that Nicholson had also been approached for a cameo in Dr. Sleep in 2019, the sequel to The Shining, and had declined. As recently as April 2025, Director James L. Brooks confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter that Nicholson was still reading scripts regularly and said he would not be surprised to see him work again. But the scripts kept arriving and nothing moved him enough to act on it. The rumors that filled the silence were predictable. Reports claimed he had stepped away because of memory loss severe enough to prevent him from learning lines. Those reports spread rapidly online and caused real distress among his admirers. They were denied clearly by people with actual access to him, including journalist Maria Shriver, who described the memory claims as completely false. The more credible picture came from those who actually knew him and stayed in contact. Record producer Lou Adler, one of his longest-standing close friends, provided what may be the simplest and most accurate explanation in a 2023 podcast appearance, saying that Nicholson was doing exactly what he wanted, that he wanted to be quiet, to eat what he wanted, and to live life entirely on his terms. There was no hidden crisis. There was no health catastrophe being concealed. There was a man who had spent 60 years in one of the most relentlessly public professions imaginable and who had decided, clearly and deliberately, that he no longer wanted to be public. By the early 2020s, the world Nicholson moved through had contracted dramatically. He spent nearly all of his time inside his Mulholland Drive compound. His children, particularly Lorraine and Ray, became his primary companions. Ray, who has built his own acting career, spoke about his father with evident warmth, describing growing up having dinner with him every single night and learning what it meant to move through the world by watching how his father did it. His former girlfriend Lara Flynn Boyle told people that there was no such thing as retirement for Jack, that his world was always alive with its own kind of magic. Danny DeVito, whose friendship with Nicholson stretches back more than 50 years, gave the most direct recent update available when he told people in the summer of 2025 that he had seen Jack around his birthday and that he was doing great, describing their connection as something that had required no warming-up period from the very first day they met, two people who had simply recognized each other immediately. A source quoted by the New York Post around the same time said that Nicholson did not like to be seen much in public anymore, that part of his appeal had always rested on his extravagant energy and presence, and that all of it catches up with a person eventually. The source then added the line that explains the entire disappearance more clearly than anything else, that Jack and those close to him preferred that people remember him as he was. That preference was not vanity in its smallest sense. It was a profound act of self-awareness from a man who understood, perhaps better than anyone living, the difference between a legend and a person. He had spent 4 decades building something that transcended any individual performance or film. He had the wisdom and the discipline to stop before the accumulating weight of age and visibility could erode what he had built. And then, on February 16, 2025, he appeared one final time. NBC aired the SNL 50th anniversary special, and from his seat in the packed audience at Studio 8H in New York, wearing a dark jacket and a beret with the New York Yankees logo on the front, 87-year-old Jack Nicholson leaned forward and spoke 5 words. "Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Sandler." The room erupted. Sandler pointed toward him and told the audience that Jack had made it out tonight, that he loved him. Photographers captured Nicholson leaving the Carlisle Hotel the next morning, walking with a cane, his daughter Lorraine at his side. It was the most he had been seen in years. It felt, to everyone watching, like something final, not a comeback, not a tease of more to come, but a man acknowledging the end of something by choosing to be present for one last moment in a room full of people who understood exactly what they were witnessing. The gate on Mulholland Drive is not a tragedy. It is the final move of someone who always understood exactly what he was doing. Jack Nicholson gave the world 60 years of performances that will be studied long after everyone who watched them in theaters has gone. And then, having done that, he gave the world something even rarer, a silence so complete and deliberate that it became its own kind of statement. He did not lose Hollywood. He let it go on his own terms, without ceremony or explanation, without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching the legend slowly fade. The man who gave the world the axe through the bathroom door, the courtside sunglasses, and the grin that could terrify or seduce depending on the angle decided that the greatest final act available to him was no act at all. Just a closed gate on a hill, and a legacy that needs nothing else added to it.